You mentioned in your Jones video yesterday that while you could see Jon maybe saying he needs 6 months as a form of leverage, you couldn't see it having much success as UFC has a history of not responding to leverage. I largely agree, but I wonder if the details surrounding this case make it a unique situation. Okay, let's see. One, the fact that by Dana's own admission that this has the potential to be the biggest fight in the company's history, especially if they choose to promote their best ability, press tours, for example. Two, UFC is in the middle of trying to get a new deal, possibly with Netflix, and this fight and or possibly its rematch, should Jon lose, could be a huge incentive and bargaining tool. Again, I 100% agree with you that 99.9% of the time, UFC does not respond or give into being leveraged. I just feel that those particular aspects, plus the UFC's current lack of stars overall, may make it so that Jon just so happens to be leveraging at just the right time where he may be successful. It just likely won't be repeatable at scale. This is a perfectly reasonable challenge, and it's an interesting point. Let me say a couple things. If you guys, speaking of Substack, if you don't follow John Nash on his Hey Not the Face Substack, you should. Full disclosure, I'm a subscriber. So I follow it. And he had an interesting discussion about UFC pay-per-views. And one of the things that he said was, for sure, by the way, they are down. This has been known for some time. The question is exactly how much they're down, but they're down pretty significantly. That's really not at issue. The question is kind of more interesting, which is ESPN pays UFC $20 million per pay-per-view, and then they get to, whatever they pull back on the pay-per-view end, they basically get to keep. But $20 million, that's pretty fucking significant, which means they have to sell higher than 300,000 pay-per-view buys, at least on average, in order for that to be returned. And that's really not been happening. And as Jon points out, and I think either this week's episode or whatever it was, he basically argues, and that's kind of one problem, but that would be solvable under a situation where, okay, UFC 3-0 blah 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 doesn't sell, UFC 3-0 blah 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 +1 doesn't sell, but then Conor comes back and it sells a million buys, and then they make up all the difference on the back end with Conor, and they'd be cool with that. Or even to an extent, Jon Jones. I think the Jon Jones and Stipe one sold pretty well. I don't think it was like a blockbuster, but again, it's the point I've made about Jon consistently. He'll sell somewhere between 5 and 700,000 pay-per-view buys consistently, and that's a fuck ton. It's always been a lot. It remains a lot. It doesn't put him in the Conor altitude or the Ronda altitude, but it puts him in pretty elite altitude just the same. Anyway, that sold pretty well, but when the fuck is he going to be back? He was gone a year before that, and then basically 3 years before that. He's been gone forever. And so you can't even get that on the back end now. And that's actually where apparently, according to Jon, some of the friction is happening, which is kind of interesting. So to your point, in this place where they want to flex some muscle and show what they can do, getting Jon to do that could prove quite beneficial. I think that's absolutely an interesting point. And here's the point that I guess I didn't really communicate yesterday. It can be hard to tell whether Jon wants this fight. And I don't think that Jon wants this fight, but I do believe that with a proper incentive, he would basically agree to it, pay my number and I'll just go through it. And even if it tarnishes his record, because if on the chance that he loses, he'll just suck it up, right? I kind of think that's where he's at. That seems to be the most accurate read. It's not like he's chomping at the bit to get this fight or something. It's not like he's acting irrationally as a negotiator, right? He is a big star for the company, at least in terms of what they have available as a pay-per-view driver. This is an important time for the company. This might be, in fact, in all likelihood, if it hasn't already been his last one, if he were to fight one more time, that would definitely be his last fight. He is a proven draw at the box office. He is a proven draw on pay-per-view. You know what I mean? I understand why he's trying to negotiate in the way that he's trying to negotiate. The problem is he's just up against something that just doesn't budge. I fully grant. Let me say this. I don't know if this fight will happen. I'm trying to remain optimistic that it will. Okay. I think him holding out in the way that he's holding out, it makes a lot of sense. The question you have to ask yourself is, will it be successful? And what you have to realize is the UFC, if they were paying Jon more money, could have had Jon more regularly all this time. Conor's had issues with them. A lot of headliners who make Francis have, or Francis Francis versus whoever the fuck is not going to sell, but Francis versus some other big names definitely would sell. Certainly at this point too, after everything he's done in boxing. and they don't want to deal with him. It's like, dude, I should say, the UFC absolutely could do these things you're talking about, and maybe they will. Maybe they will. Maybe they absolutely will, to the point you raise. Ordinarily, they never will, but this time will be the one that breaks the mold. But part of the reason that they're in the place that they're in is that they have refused to do exactly that. They have refused to. John wanted Deontay Wilder money. What was that, 2021 or 2022? And you guys know how I feel about Jon Jones. Not my favorite, but his arguments about wanting Deontay Wilder money, or at a bare minimum, much more than he's making, I find them all totally reasonable. But they didn't do it. They didn't do it. And they've not done it for a lot of people. They really believe in holding to their business model and not being leveraged. I wrote an article about it on Substack. If there is one constant in this universe, death, taxes, and UFC not wanting to be leveraged. Could it happen this time because of a very unique set of circumstances? First of all, I hope that it does. And you absolutely could be right. I guess I'm just going to say I cannot predict the future. I do not know what will happen. I am just skeptical that they'll bend. I think somebody to make this happen is probably going to be John's going to have to bend. Again, I think they'll probably bump his pay at the margins or whatever. But I think that's what's going to have to happen if this fight happens. He's going to have to basically give. And I don't know if that will happen. But you're totally right. It's just, dude, the reason they're in this fucking situation is because they don't ever want to change what they're doing. They don't want to. They want to keep the court documents. There are various places where they articulate that they want to keep permanently athlete compensation at 20% or below. Like they want to fix that into the business model. They don't want to break that. They like that consistency. So we shall. You know what? I'll say this. I'll move on to the next question after this. We'll see what matters the most to them. We'll see, based on what happens, we'll get a nice look to see when there's a chance to measure what their biggest priorities are at these kinds of critical junctures. What do they really go back to as their most important? I guess we're going to find out. I have a guess about that, but we shall see. We shall fucking see. But yeah, pay-per-view buys are down. That's like way down. Like that's not in any way fiction. That's not in any way false. That's very, very real. This is what I mean when we try to explain to audiences, it's like something's missing from the product, man. I mean, everyone's like, oh, boomers wanting their boomer version of MMA. And dude, that probably does play a role. I mean, I'm actually, you know what? It definitely plays a role. You guys are married to your era of MMA. It's a new era of MMA. You have to kind of get on board. All right, there's probably something to that. I'm not against that. At the same time, man, we're not crazy for saying there's something that's been missing. Like there is. Clearly there's been something missing. And the fact that people aren't buying pay-per-views, a lot of it has to do with some technological issues. But, if Conor can move 1 million units on ESPN Plus, well, then 1 million units can be moved. You just have to give people the proper incentive. And they simply have not been doing that. What do you make of the report that pay-per-view numbers are way down? UFC and TKO at large seem more focused on the live experience. Do they? I think there's a huge debate about that. And breaking gate records these days. Are the potential broadcasting deals with Netflix, etc., more lucrative than raw pay-per-view buys? So what you have to ask yourself is what Netflix wants from it and what they don't. First of all, I'm going to say it one more time. The numbers are down. This is not they're down. They're way, way down. I don't think they're down in such a way that if you brought Jon Jones back, or if you brought, depending on the matchup, Nate Diaz back, or obviously Conor, or whatever, that these don't or wouldn't sell. Imagine you again. This is a crazy example. Imagine if you brought Khabib back, would it sell on pay-per-view? It would sell fucking massive numbers. You know what I mean? So it's not like things can't sell. It's not like no matter what they do, it simply does not work. That's not the point. It just means that whatever the current slate of people that they can reliably put on pay-per-view, including but not limited to Poatan and Ilia Topuria, these guys are celebrated figures in the fan base, but it doesn't necessarily translate to being huge pay-per-view draws. right? And ditto for a guy like Bilal Muhammad, who's very good but not a draw on pay-per-view. And even Drickus and Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland is an interesting case, right? I was actually having a conversation with an MMA manager about it this week. And Sean Strickland's an interesting case because he is quite popular. Like, if you look at his, his Google metrics, these are informal measurements, but that or social media reach or whatever, he's obviously quite popular. But the thing about it is, it's not like he developed his popularity because people watched his fights and then decided that they loved him. It was that people, for disaffected males, but others as well, decided that they liked his personality and then just used that as a gateway to then kind of like watch some of his fights. But that's a tenuous kind of relationship. It doesn't go one-to-one all the time because he's not drawing on pay-per-view. And sort of this is my point, right? There are certain guys that are definitely like big celebrated figures, but they're not draws in the same way that their era of predecessors might have been. Now, to that same point, obviously pay-per-view is very, very different in 2025 than it was in 2020, and certainly 2015. There's simply no question about that. I mean, we are there. The question is, like, how much inventory does Netflix want? Right? How much do they want? What do they want to pay for it? Do they want to pay $20 million for each event? Do they want pay-per-view events? Then they just, they're free pay-per-views. We just watch them on Netflix, but it's like pay-per-view quality. Do they want something more like a slate of fight nights? All the available reporting suggests they don't want the whole thing, but they doesn't seem like they want the whole thing. They want like a slice of it. What kind of slice do they want for what kind of pay, and what does it mean to them? And that part's kind of hard to know. The thing you were asking was, TKO seem more focused on the live experience and breaking gate records these days. This is one of my favorite things about UFC that I think people just ignore all the time, and I find it hilarious. The UFC is very, very secretive about all their numbers, except when they really, really, really want to share them, like when they're doing like record gates, which they are doing quite frequently, obviously. They're happy to like share those numbers. They can't wait to tell you those numbers. You should just have to ask yourself, like, what numbers do they conceal and which ones do they share, and like, what does that really tell you? And I know some might say, oh, well, they've never really shared pay-per-view buys. But when they were really selling, they weren't challenging them either. They were very accepting of them being what they are. And this is also, by the way, the same organization that went state by state and certain commissions to lobby the state legislature to prevent payout numbers from ever being released to the public, right? Why would you want to keep that secret if this was something you were incredibly proud of? Just something to keep in mind. So, like, they're breaking gate records these days. Incontestably true. They're doing it seemingly everywhere they go, and that kind of says a lot. At the same time, how do you square that with the pay-per-view buys being down? The last thing, are the potential broadcasting deals with Netflix more lucrative than raw pay-per-view buys? Again, totally a question of like what they can charge for it. ESPN pays $20 million currently, $20 million for every UFC pay-per-view. Is Netflix going to want to pay that? Is UFC going to want to bump in that? Are they going to want 40 million, 50 million? What are they going to want? If they're wanting $1 billion a year, where does all of that fit into it? We'll have to just see what it looks like in the end. We'll just have to see what it looks like. I think that they probably will buy some. I think it'll be, I think that they're probably going to buy closer to the premium side based on what, the available reporting suggests. So there's a big question about like where everything else is going to go. Where do you put Road to UFC? You can put it on Fight Pass. Where do you put Contender Series? Okay, you can put that on Fight Pass too. But where do you put all the fight nights? Where do you put, everything else that fits in, or even pay-per-views if they wanted to buy like good fight nights? You know what I mean? It's hard to know. It's hard to know what it really is a function of like what they want. And then if that's the case, do they take their product to Amazon? I don't know. I think part of what UFC and I think any broadcaster is going to consider going forward is, do they want a broadcast deal with the highest bidder, or do they want a broadcast deal with a high bid, potentially the highest bidder too, in conjunction with somebody or an entity that has a media arm? Consider Paramount has CBS. It's got a media arm. ESPN has a media arm. Like, you can do these things. That hasn't worked out all that well recently, but in the history of the UFC and ESPN relationship, that has worked out quite well for the vast majority of that time. If you go to Amazon, it's not like there's Amazon. I mean, I know they do nominally some kind of programming, but it's not First Take, right? Or on the Paramount side, it's not CBS Sports HQ or something like that. It's not really any of those things. So that I think that's going to play a role too. It just seems to me that you're going to get a divided like broadcasting package, right? It just seems to me that's where we're headed. Like some people are going to buy this, some people are going to buy that, and they're going to have to just divvy it up between places, and that's less than ideal, but that's where we are. And the other sports leagues, regrettably, they do the exact same.